Hey, what's up everybody, this is Meath24, and today I've been taking a look at the Metal Gear Solid Deluxe Edition graphic novel. The thing about this that I didn't realize when I purchased it is that it actually includes both the complete graphic novel of Metal Gear Solids 1 and 2. I thought it was just a reprint of Metal Gear Solid 1 because that one, the old omnibus, had been out of print for quite a while, so I thought it was a re-release of that with hardcover, but it actually includes the second game's adaptation as well. So I think the title's a little bit misleading there, just using the Metal Gear Solid 1 title for this deluxe edition. I feel like maybe if they called it the Metal Gear Solid Complete Edition or Complete Collection or whatever, might have been a little bit more, I don't know, easy to identify it as having both things in there. And there's nothing on the back that really indicates that it's got both of them in there. It just says Metal Gear Solid again there, with sort of the stylized picture in the background. Same thing on the spine there. Just says Metal Gear Solid Deluxe Edition, and that's MGS1 Snake there at the top in the little picture. The insides are pretty simply stated. There's no real cover sleeve to this or anything. So from the position of buying this online, if you're looking at getting it, know that it does include Metal Gear Solid 2 as well as the first one. If you have it in the store, obviously you can flip it open and look through it, but I bought this off Amazon, so I didn't have the ability to check what all was included in here, and the item description, if I recall correctly, didn't describe that there was the inclusion of Metal Gear Solid 2 as well. So this was printed by IDW, and I remember when they had the omnibus for the first game out years ago. I saw it at Barnes & Noble and thought it was kind of cool. They had a video game graphic novel adaptation at the time, and this was, had to have been like 5 years ago or so when I saw it there. It was a paperback. It was decently thick. I've seen the Sons of Liberty paperback, which is also decently thick. This thing itself is pretty hefty. It's as heavy, if not more so, than my... actually might be more heavy than my Annihilation omnibus. I'm not sure how many pages this thing is. It's not quite as thick as that, but the binding is heavier and the pages are actually thicker, and I'll show that off a little bit more in a minute here. But the art here is done by Ashley Wood, who did the art for the cutscenes in Peace Walker. I believe did the concept and character art for pretty much every other game in the series up to this point. And it's sort of that splash watercolor look, very jagged and stylized character designs, very exaggerated motions, longer legs and all that when they're running through the hallways. It's a really cool art style, one that I think translates surprisingly well to this graphic novel medium. It's one where I think it helps that knowing this is a video game source for the story, you can kind of better picture what stuff's supposed to look like in your head. Otherwise, if that weren't the case, it'd be kind of a little obscure with some of the backdrops there. But if you're familiar with the Metal Gear Solid story already and the Metal Gear lore and the character designs, environments, and the tech and all that, I think you'll really get a kick out of this art style and the way that they depict the Metal Gears themselves, the bosses, and all that. So the story follows Metal Gear Solid 1 pretty much to a T. You have Snake infiltrating Shadow Moses there, and you have the whole history of Big Boss and Zanzibar Land and the Genome Soldiers, and we meet Meryl early on and the DARPA chief, and they give the whole backstory on, what Metal Gear Rex is and the fact that maybe Snake doesn't have all the details yet. Meets up with Ocelot and Psycho Mantis and Liquid and Vulcan Raven and Sniper Wolf and, of course, Gray Fox. It's a very straightforward adaptation of the first game, and that's perfectly fine because the first game, compared to the later ones, is pretty short. Not that any of the Metal Gear games are short per se, but by comparison, it is a much shorter game than the other ones. It's also, I think, a really cool setting for this art style to have it, in Alaska, where there's so much snow coming down all the time, and you have really cool effects with the weather there and all that. The way that they handle the actual boss fights is a little different in the games in some cases, just because obviously you don't have the interactive medium there. But you do have some cool stuff, like with the Psycho Mantis fight, instead of it obviously being the switch controllers and read your memory card, because you don't have that here, he sort of messes with Snake's head and forces him to see things that aren't actually happening there. And I think that's a good sort of stand-in for that element being absent from this reading the story instead of playing it. Otherwise, the boss fights are relatively quickly handled. They're entertaining enough, but obviously they're not going to be nearly as lengthy as when you're playing them because, again, you're not involved. But I do think they're handled well for the way that this story plays out. I like the fact that there are different colored text bubbles for when they're using the codec to call each other to indicate who's talking, and because I've been such a huge fan of the Metal Gear Solid series for years, obviously I read everything in those characters' voices, Cam Clark and David Hayter, and so on and so forth. Metal Gear Solid 2, on the other hand, is a little less direct of an adaptation, and I don't know, to be honest, if that storyline was printed at the same time that the video game came out, if it was sort of like a merchandising tie-in, because I know they had action figures back in the day of Raiden, and I think Solidus, and Olga, and a few other characters from the games. But I don't know if this ran concurrent with it, because it deviates from the game in decently large ways. It's not consistent throughout, but there's times where they throw information from the end of the game, like very big revelation, spoilerish stuff from the end of the game, within the first couple chapters. And I thought that was really strange. The second game's adaptation is paced a lot faster, which is also incredibly strange, considering that I always felt Metal Gear Solid 2 was very much a slow burn. It's one of those games where you are kind of given the facts very slowly. It's revealed over time what's going on, and then the last hour and a half, 2 hours are some of my favorite moments in Metal Gear history in general. And I know Metal Gear Solid 2 is considered to be one of the less popular entries in the series because of the fact that you're playing as Raiden for the game, and that's why I wonder if this wasn't released after the game came out, because they shoehorned Snake into scenarios that he wasn't in the game, and scenarios where I feel like it sort of defeats the purpose of having Raiden as the main character. In this version, he's sort of just there, and Pliskin's doing all the work. Or Pliskin, rather, Snake is doing all the work. And in the video game, it was fine to have it implied that, Snake's doing his own thing, kind of off behind the scenes, but here he's just doing things that Raiden straight up did in the game. He's the one who faces off with a couple of the bosses. He's the one who takes center stage for odd chunks of the story, and I don't really understand why they did that. But it just sort of, I don't know, defeated the value of having Raiden as a character there and his development over the course of the story, I felt. And the thing is, I realize some people don't like Raiden as a character in MGS2, that they like him more from MGS4 or Metal Gear Rising. But the thing that I always found was good with Raiden, and maybe I was a little bit less let down with the direction they took Raiden in this second game, was because I knew going into it that a lot of people didn't like him and didn't like the second game as much as the other ones. So maybe I had that advantage, but the thing that I did enjoy about it was that, he doesn't really know what's going on until late in the game, and there's this whole idea of, like, this sudden revelation forces him to change his personality a little bit, forces him to grow up to a certain degree, forces him to recognize that there are always going to be greater forces at play, and that he needs to have. I don't remember if Snake actually says it to him. Keep your eyes and ears open, or something like that. But in the game, but that's generally what he has to do by the end of the game. Is he has to be paying attention to all the small details to know who he needs to be allied with and who he's working for, or what goal he's trying to achieve and all that. The only character that I really had a problem with in the game was Rose. She was incredibly annoying. The whole idea of them throwing her in there as, like, his girlfriend or fiance or whatever it was on this mission that was supposed to be top secret was hilariously dumb. And I don't know, it never sold me that much, that element of that would ever fly in any sort of covert operation like this. But that aside, Rose isn't nearly as prominent in this storyline. She's not calling him every 5 seconds, thankfully. But I don't feel like the trade-off there, having Snake take center stage for the second game, is really justified, especially when it, you know, diminishes the importance of Raiden in the story. I am going to get into spoilers territory here a second. If you haven't played all the way to the end of MGS2 or whatever, I feel like it's kind of a silly thing to say spoiler alert here because this game is, what, 15 years old almost? But that said, I'm going to, you know, put the little spoiler warning up there that talking about the end of this graphic novel. In the end of the game, we have Raiden and Solidus face off, and it's very much a parallel to Solid Snake and Big Boss, right? It's the whole father and son, there can only be one big boss, that sort of a thing. And it very much fits with the whole Patriot scheme of the S2 program. The problem that I have with it is that in this version, Raiden is not the one who finishes off Solidus. In the game, he finishes off Solidus, and Solidus backs up and falls onto the statue in front of one of the halls in New York City. And then he dies. And it's Raiden has sort of inadvertently bested his master. The, you know, the student has become the master now. He's surpassed his old teacher there, and sort of done away with his bloody past to a certain degree. Even though it does creep up in the later games some, but it's sort of that final climax for him as a character. And I thought that was great. In this, Raiden's getting his butt kicked by Solidus, and Snake intervenes and takes out Solidus. And again, it sort of defeated the whole point of having having Raiden be in this story at all. If you're just going to kick him to the curb and have Snake take the spotlight for the whole thing, why bother with Raiden? So that's why I really wonder if this didn't come out later, and I apologize for not knowing that off the top of my head, but it would make more sense to me if this came out like a year after MGS2 when people were like, oh, we don't like Raiden that much, you know, he's not as cool of a character as Snake, and so the writers decided to adjust it for that audience. But like I said, I think storytelling-wise, it's a silly thing to do because it sort of defeats Raiden's entire purpose or entire point in the story. As I mentioned, the boss fights in MGS2 storyline there are much quicker than the ones in MGS1, which is also strange to me because there's fewer boss fights in MGS2 than there were in MGS1, or at least fewer boss characters. And so for them to be like, oh, we're going to deal with Vamp and Fat Man and Fortune real quick, and then they do draw out the ending a little bit, which is nice, because to me that's the best part of MGS2, is that last hour and a half to 2 hour stretch when they're dealing with Arsenal gear and all that. I think that's the best part of MGS2 far and away. So I'm glad to see they draw that out and they give Solidus plenty of time to shine. But I feel like it's kind of all for naught in this version. So as a whole collection, this is a great binding here, a great looking cover, and you do get both stories for the price of 1.5, kind of. I mean, it's a reprint, so it's a high quality print, and I did mention before that the pages are a little bit thicker and kind of more glossy than some other graphic novels, certainly more so than the Marvel graphic novels that I have. This thing retails for, well, the back of the thing says $75. I can tell you I didn't spend anywhere there that much. I spent around half as much for mine. But it's not terribly expensive on Amazon last I looked. So if you want to take that into consideration, you know, you pay, say, $40-45 for it, and you're getting both the first and second one, I think it's a little pricey if you're getting it just for the first one. But if you don't mind the fact that the second game's adaptation isn't superb, but it's still in there, then I think it's definitely a worthwhile consideration for you. I'm just disappointed that the second game's adaptation wasn't as great as it could have been. I also would really like it if they did even if it was just like quick one-offs in there, if they had included some new stuff for like Peace Walker, or a tease for Phantom Pain, or something from Snake Eater even. Not necessarily a full-fledged thing, even though those would be great. And I'm surprised they didn't do one for Snake Eater back in the day. But I think maybe like some new stuff in there would have been kind of cool. I don't know if the cover art they have in the back here was ever included in the original Omnibus paperbacks or not. There's some, I'll flip to them. There were some cover variants, and there were some, well, maybe the cover variants were earlier on, but there is some, like some character profile sketches here. Ashley Wood's art here in the back. There we got Snake. We have maybe that's Snake, maybe it's Big Boss, I don't remember. Kind of hard to tell there how grizzled he is. We got Raiden and Fat Man. So you get an idea. There's some extra art in the back, but there's no like interviews or anything like you have with some of the bigger Marvel releases. So that's a little disappointing. I do like the fact that the paper and the binding are really good here. And like I said, it is a hefty graphic novel when you're holding it. It's got some weight to it, which is a little unusual. But on the whole, I'm kind of on the fence about this one. Like, I love the adaptation of the first game, but the second game's adaptation is just not as good as it could have been. So that's sort of I guess what's the word I'm looking for? Middle ground review for you. It's not my favorite, but it's not terrible either. And like, it's such a disappointment that the second game's adaptation isn't that great, because the first game's is superb. So that's pretty much it for this review, and with that, I will see you guys next time.